Okay, so in this first step of starting to enhance this image and doing a little bit of post-processing within this composition file itself is to look at some of this entourage that we've added, so specifically these trees, and enhance them a little bit more. And again, this is a non-destructive workflow process where instead of actually editing these trees inside of this file, we're actually going to edit them separately and have them basically just linked here. You'll see when I brought it in, there is this icon, meaning it is a smart object, and if I want to edit it, I can always double click on here. It'll bring up a separate file, but as soon as I start to make changes, such as adjusting the hue and saturation, right? So now it's fall, I can save it, and it gives me this warning that I have to actually flatten this because that image that I originally brought in was just a flat JPEG, which means that every time I make a change, I need to flatten it and make it a JPEG again. And that's just not a very efficient way of working with these files. So let's just go ahead and close that. So instead of bringing these just in as an embedded flat or JPEG file, sometimes it's good to develop your entourage separately. Again, so this allows you to actually use them in multiple files. It kind of builds your collection of images and trees and people and all that. So what we want to do is actually treat this as a Photoshop file. So I've gone ahead and just opened up this original JPEG file and just saved it as a PSD or a Photoshop file, and I gave it a new name. So now we can start to make all of our changes here. And so again, one of the first things I want to do is get rid of that white background. A good way to kind of see how effective that is to create a background layer, use a really vibrant color so we can see how well it's working, right? So now I got this bright pink in the background. I'll again go to blending options and shift over this white scale to remove some of that white, and again to get rid of some of the kind of halo around some of those. I'll split it by holding the Alt button and drag it more back to the white. Can adjust this until I get a good clean removal of that white. Okay, it's a little bit harder to see that if you just have that checkered background, as you can see the difference there. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'll go ahead and get rid of that. And so the next thing I want to do is begin to do another non-destructive workflow process of enhancing this image using the burn and dodge tool. We did a little bit of that on our boardwalk here, but I want to also show how well it works with things like this to really kind of add some dimension to it. Again, that blending option doesn't actually physically remove the white. We can still see it in the thumbnail there. So in order to get rid of it, we just need to right click, convert to smart object, and now we can see that it is in fact kind of a checkerboard. So here we can make all those fun adjustments. So if I want, I can just, again, hold Control to select just the pixels of our tree now. Maybe add a hue and saturation. We can kind of brighten those colors a little bit more. We can even, I'll show you later on, how we can change the hue to change the seasons of it, right? We can make it more of the fall color, as well as maybe something more towards the summer where it's really kind of green. But that's kind of a fun trick I'll show you later. So I'll again kind of do that same thing of selecting everything. I'll create a new layer at the top. I'll use the marquee tool to fill it with a 50% gray and change that to an overlay blending mode. So it basically just becomes invisible. right? We don't see anything changing, having it on and off. And this becomes our non-destructive burn and dodge layer. So the first thing I want to do is start to use the burn tool to add some shadows to it. So this is where I'm just going to start to brush over all these shadow areas. I want to keep the exposure pretty low, anywhere between 20 and 30, and keep it a nice, large, soft brush, and start to just kind of go over some of those shadow areas. As I'm doing this, you're probably not going to see a whole lot of change happening. If I zoom in a little bit more, you'll see that I can really start to kind of enhance these shadow areas. All right, so you can kind of start to define the lighting on this a little bit more in a custom way now. And then I want to do the same thing with the highlights using the dodge tool. And again, I want to keep that exposure pretty low, but you'll see that this works really well kind of to add some additional light. So the areas that are already bright, I like to go over it again to kind of enhance that a little bit more. I can create more of these mid-tones as well. So this starts again, kind of give it a lot more depth. I can just kind of start to sprinkle in some of that light by going over some of these items or these parts of the tree. But yeah, I kind of want to really enhance some of these areas where it's already nice and highlighted to just, again, really give it some nice depth. So we can kind of see that this area right here and here are really getting hit hard with that light. And you'll see by just turning this on and off how much of a difference that does to add that depth and stronger contrast. So once you've kind of made all these changes, again, I'm just going to save it. So it's just tree1 PSD Photoshop file. I'll go to here. We can see that we have it already back there. So something I can do is just right click on this and say replace contents, and go to that Photoshop file, hit place, and now we can see it basically just keeps that same orientation and everything. And now what's great is if I want to actually make changes to it, I can always double click on this. It'll open up the file again, shows you all the layers, and maybe now you want it to be a slightly different hue, so let's make it a little more green. Maybe it's really vibrant. Again, I'm just going to exaggerate this to show you how this works. I'll hit Control S. I'll go back to here, and now it just simultaneously updates it. So again, I'm not a huge fan of that color, so I'm just going to go ahead and bring this back down. If I want it to be more of that fall color, again, I'll just save it. Go back here, and now it's updated again. So it's a good way to just update separate files for things like this and have them linked into your kind of master Photoshop file. So let's just make it a little bit kind of more kind of hazy fade to it. Maybe I don't want that burn and dodge so strong, so I'll reduce the opacity even a little bit, save it, and again, now it'll all update. And that's something you want to do for all your kind of entourage like that, where you want to kind of enhance it a little bit. So again, I'm not going to do it for all these trees because it's one of those things where you can get really specific on a tree, or you can just kind of apply it to everything as more of a flat composition, which I will show actually a little bit more in one of our final videos on this post-processing. But it's one of those things where we can start to really kind of give it a lot more depth overall.